her battlefield record read like a myth. At the siege of Drano's Ridge, she had stood at the front lines when an entire Warbeast division charged, her war blades spinning arcs of silver light through the dust storm until the enemy line broke. At the Scarn Belt, she had fought in zero gravity, vaulting between debris fields, cutting through boarding parties with mechanical precision while her armor bore the scars of plasma fire. She had once been surrounded for 3 days on the frozen plains of Iskar Prime with no hope of extraction, yet when relief forces finally arrived, they found her standing atop a pile of enemy corpses. Blood steaming in the cold, unflinching and silent. To the K-roll, Commander Thraina was the embodiment of Korvara unyielding will. To the enemy, she was the blade without mercy. And then came the humans. The Dominion-Human alliance had been uneasy from the start. Humans were still new to the wider galaxy, their military record brief but already unsettling. They didn't fight like the other species. They adapted too quickly, improvised too easily. Their soldiers laughed under fire, cracked jokes in the trenches, and treated officers with a strange mix of respect and familiarity. The K-roll, who held rigid hierarchies and strict codes of conduct, didn't know what to make of them. Marcus Halle was one such human. A Terran lieutenant with an easy smile and the sort of relaxed confidence that grated on more formal alien officers. He had been assigned as the human liaison to Thraina's strike group after border skirmishes threatened to boil into open war. Most expected him to last maybe a week before Thraina's cold, disciplined demeanor crushed him. Instead, their first real meeting took place in the aftermath of a battle at Uran's Pass, a narrow canyon world where the Dominion had intercepted a pirate fleet attempting to smuggle weapons into the frontier. Thraina had personally led the ground assault, leaping from her dropship into enemy fire without hesitation. By the time the human squad arrived to reinforce, the battle was already decided. The rocky ground was littered with defeated foes, and the last plumes of smoke curled into the alien sky. At the highest ridge, Thraina stood like a living statue, her armor scored and steaming from plasma hits, her war blade dripping faintly. In the thin light, Marcus climbed the ridge, breathing hard from the uphill run. He was still new to the Dominion's combat tempo, and the sight of the towering Puro warrior in her element was something else. That, he panted, hands on his knees, was amazing, Commander. He hesitated, the first word that came to mind not exactly regulation military speech. You're cute when you're all worked up like that. The air shifted. It was subtle, but Marcus noticed it immediately. The Kirill soldiers nearby frozen place, their expressions unreadable behind their faceplates. One or two, even, turned their heads away, as though giving their commander privacy. Thraina herself went utterly still. Her blade lowered slightly, but her golden eyes locked on him in a way that made Marcus wonder if he just insulted her without realizing it. Then, to his utter surprise, her pale silver skin darkened along the high ridges of her cheekbones. The change deepened quickly, until the color was unmistakably crimson. She was blushing. Marcus had no idea the Kirill even could blush. For a woman who had once charged a fortified position single-handedly, this was unexpected. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally sheathed her blade with a sharp motion. Without a word, she turned and began issuing orders to her troops. Her voice clipped and a little too brisk. Marcus, meanwhile, stood there for a few moments, trying to process what had just happened. He wasn't the type to care much about rank or alien protocol if someone impressed him, he said so. But this reaction, this was new. He could feel curious stares from some of the soldiers, though no one dared speak of it. Marcus wasn't naive. He noticed the shift in Commander Thraina's behavior almost immediately. Before, she'd look him dead in the eye during mission briefings, her tone sharp and commanding. Now her gaze flicked to him for a fraction of a second before sliding away, her voice carrying an unfamiliar stiffness whenever she addressed him. It wasn't avoidance exactly. She still spoke to him when needed, issued orders, and reviewed tactical data, but there was a subtle hesitation, as though every word she spoke in his presence had to be carefully measured. Marcus suspected it had something to do with what he'd said on Uran's Pass. Cute had seemed harmless to him at the time, a simple compliment. But the way her troops reacted, the sudden, almost ceremonial silence, made him think he'd stepped on some very big cultural landmine. He decided to dig carefully. First, he tried asking the K-Roll soldiers directly. That went nowhere. Some simply claimed they didn't understand the Terran word, though the twitch in their ear crests told Marcus they were lying. Others changed the subject with military precision, as though even discussing the matter would be inappropriate. Then, he tried consulting the translation database in the ship's archives. That proved even less helpful. The database rendered cute into the K-Roll tongue as a phrase that literally meant small and pleasing to the eye, which sounded harmless enough. Unless you considered that 3 Na was neither small nor someone you could safely comment on without expecting a verbal knife in the ribs. It wasn't until 3 days later, in the medical wing, that Marcus found someone willing to talk. He'd come to check on a wounded Dominion medic who had been grazed during the Uran skirmish. While patching up his arm, the medic glanced around the otherwise empty room, then leaned toward Marcus in a way that made it clear this was not going to be a casual conversation. "You do not understand the weight of what you said," the medic began in careful, accented Galactic Standard. Marcus frowned. "What? Calling her cute? It's just, I don't know, a compliment." The medic's ear crests shifted in what Marcus had learned was the K-Roll equivalent of a grimace. For us, such a word is rarely used outside of blood bonds or kin. It is intimate. To call someone that, especially in public, is to place them in a different space in your heart. It is to say, "I see you not only as a warrior, but as something precious." Marcus blinked. "So, you're saying I basically told her Yes," the medic interrupted gently. "And not in private, but in front of her warriors. You declared it to everyone." Marcus ran a hand down his face. "Well, that explains the looks." The medic studied him for a moment. "Most commanders would have rebuked you, perhaps even challenged you for disrespect. The fact that she did not speaks volumes." "Volumes about what?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. The medic's gaze sharpened. "That she did not mind." The conversation left Marcus turning it over in his head for the rest of the day. The Kurl were a species forged in war. Their culture revolved around strength, honor, and an unyielding exterior. Vulnerability wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. To admit someone could stir softer feelings in you was almost the same as handing them a weapon. And he had done it without even realizing. He thought back to that moment on the ridge. The way her eyes had widened just slightly, the stillness in her body, the deepening flush in her skin. It wasn't embarrassment in the human sense, it was exposure. She had been unshielded, and it had been him who pulled her into that space. Marcus wasn't entirely sure what to do with that information. On one hand, he hadn't meant to cause her discomfort. On the other, the thought of the most unshakable warrior in the Dominion blushing because of him, he couldn't help but feel a little smug about it. Marcus Halley was not the kind of man to leave a mystery alone, especially one that made the galaxy's most intimidating commander turn crimson. Now that he knew cute was more than a harmless word in K-Roll culture, the temptation to see just how far he could push it was irresistible. He wasn't trying to be cruel. It was more like a challenge. Thryna was a fortress, and Marcus had accidentally found a crack in the wall. The question was, what would happen if he pressed on? Iter? Their next mission together came sooner than expected. Raiders had been targeting the asteroid mining colonies in the far Ophiuchus sector. The Dominion had lost 3 convoys in the last month, so Thraina and Marcus were assigned to co-lead a joint escort run. They spent most of the journey in separate command stations, she in the forward tactical chair, he in the starboard escort craft. The convoy moved at a crawl, hugging safe lanes while scanning for ambushes. It was tedious work, which gave Marcus too much time to think. About halfway through the patrol, he decided to make his move. Opening the private comm channel between their ships, he spoke in his usual casual tone. "You know," he said, "you look way more intimidating when you're frowning." There was a pause. "I am not here to intimidate you, Lieutenant," she replied evenly. "True," Marcus said, leaning back in his seat. "But I think I like you better when you're smiling." Another pause, longer this time. Then, in a voice a shade tighter than usual, Lieutenant Halley maintained formation. He grinned. She hadn't shut him down entirely, and she definitely hadn't ignored him. That was progress. Over the next few weeks, Marcus made a game of it. He'd slip in little compliments during mission briefings, just enough to make her pause, never enough to disrupt the operation. When she adjusted her armor before boarding a dropship, he'd murmur, "Looking sharp, Commander." If she scored a direct hit in a training exercise, he'd say, "Impressive, almost as impressive as you." Every time there'd be that split-second change in her posture, the way her talons flexed ever so slightly, the tiniest delay before she answered him, and if he was lucky, just a faint shimmer of crimson along her cheek ridges. It was like fishing in uncharted waters. Sometimes he'd get nothing. Sometimes he'd get a nibble, and sometimes he'd strike gold. But Marcus also noticed something else. She was starting to fire back in her own way, not with compliments, but with proximity. She'd stand closer during briefings than protocol required. She'd choose to review after-action reports with him personally instead of delegating. And during one late-night strategy session, she'd leaned over his console to point at a tactical map, her voice so close to his ear that he could feel the faint vibration of her words. The game was becoming mutual, even if she wouldn't admit it. One day, during a joint training drill aboard the cruiser's combat deck, Marcus got the strongest reaction yet. The exercise was supposed to simulate a hostage rescue in a cramped station corridor. Thraina led the Dominion team, Marcus led the human team, and they were competing to see who could secure the target first. The Kirill team reached the mock hostage seconds before Marcus's squad. When Marcus rounded the corner and saw her standing there, victorious, he didn't bother hiding his grin. "You win," he said, stepping forward. "But you know, you're kind of adorable when you gloat." It happened instantly, the crimson flush vivid against her silver skin. This time, she didn't turn away. Instead, she stepped toward him until she was close enough for him to see the faint shimmer in her golden eyes. "You play a dangerous game, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "You should know that in Kirill culture, such words carry consequences." Marcus tilted his head. "Guess I'll just have to find out what those are." Her gaze held his for a long, silent beat before she finally turned away, signaling her team to move out. But as she passed him, Marcus could have sworn there was the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the edge of her mouth. Velra Station was a crucial outpost on the edge of Dominion space, a hub for trade and refueling on several important supply routes. Its strategic importance made it a prime target for the insurgent forces that had been gathering strength in the region. When the enemy launched their assault, it was swift and brutal. Hundreds of raiders swarmed the station in sleek, fast attack ships, striking with the ferocity of cornered beasts. The defense lines already stretched thin began to buckle under the pressure. The station's walls shook as plasma blasts tore through reinforced turrets. Alarms screamed through the corridors, and the faint pulse of explosions lit the dark skies. Commander Thriana was immediately at the forefront, issuing commands with her usual steely calm, coordinating counterattacks, rallying troops. But this time, the enemy was more organized, better equipped, and willing to sacrifice everything to bring the station down. Marcus Halle and his unit had been assigned to reinforce a vulnerable sector of the station's perimeter. They moved cautiously through narrow hallways, sidearms drawn, scanners alert for hidden ambushes. Suddenly, enemy forces opened fire from concealed positions. His squad took cover behind a bulkhead, returning fire as the firefight escalated. "We're pinned down," one of his team shouted. "Hold position. Reinforcements are 5 minutes out." Marcus replied, trying to steady his breath despite the crackle of plasma whizzing past. 5 minutes felt like an eternity. His squad was outnumbered and exposed. If the enemy broke through here, the entire defense line would collapse. Then, through the smoke and chaos, the unmistakable sound of a dropship's engines roared overhead. Marcus barely had time to register it before the hatch opened, and a blur of silver and gold armor dropped into the fray. Commander Thriana herself. Without hesitation, she surged forward, her war blade a lethal storm, cutting through enemy soldiers with terrifying precision. She absorbed hits from plasma bursts and kinetic rounds alike, her armor dented and scorched but never faltering. Her presence was a rallying beacon. Dominion troops rallied behind her, pushing the attackers back with renewed vigor. Marcus found himself fighting beside her, covering her flank, amazed at the sheer force she embodied. It was one thing to hear stories of the blade without mercy. It was another to witness it firsthand, feel the energy, the raw willpower driving her every move. When the last enemy combatant was driven back, the smoke still hanging thick in the air, Marcus leaned against a console, catching his breath. "You saved my life," he said quietly, looking up at her through sweat-streaked grime. Her breathing was heavy, her golden eyes fierce yet steady. "I would do it again." There was a moment, brief but charged, where the chaos of war faded away. Marcus saw not the indomitable warrior, but the woman beneath the armor. The one who, despite centuries of battle, still felt something when he called her cute. He smiled, low and genuine. "You're more than amazing, Commander. You're beautiful." Thriana's cheeks flushed crimson again, spreading down her neck to the tips of her ear crests. But this time, she didn't shy away or deflect the comment. Instead, her eyes held his, steady and unblinking. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was softer than before. "You understand the risk you take with such words." "I do," Marcus said without hesitation, "and I'm willing to take it." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, before she straightened, signaling the troops to secure the perimeter. The moment was fleeting, but it changed something fundamental between them. The battle for Velra Station was over, but the echoes of war lingered in the quiet hum of the repaired walls and flickering holodisplays. The joint forces had held the line, but the cost was clear. Wounded soldiers filled the medbays, and commanders convened to assess the aftermath. Marcus found himself drawn to a quieter place, away from the bustle of the command center. The observation deck, high above the station's main hub, offered a sweeping view of space, distant stars twinkling cold and indifferent, the battered station floating amid debris and smoke. It was here, away from the eyes of soldiers and diplomats, that he found Commander Thriana, standing alone. Her armor bore fresh scars from the fight dents and scorches that gleamed faintly under the soft lighting. Her silver skin still showed the faintest flush of crimson along her cheek ridges, a mark Marcus had come to recognize as the sign of her vulnerability. "You could have died today," Marcus said softly, stepping beside her. "So could you." Thryna replied without turning. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of something unspoken beneath it. They stood side by side in silence, gazing out at the vastness of space. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than Marcus had ever heard it. In my culture, words carry power more than you might expect. To call someone cute is not merely a compliment. It is a declaration, a claim of connection. It means seeing someone not only as a warrior, but as something precious, something to protect. Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. I didn't know. I only meant to say what I felt. She finally turned to face him, her golden eyes searching his. And yet, you have faced war without fear, Marcus Hale, but with one word, you disarmed me. He smiled gently. Maybe that's the point. Some battles aren't won by weapons. Thryna's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. Perhaps, but this bond you have spoken into existence is not without risk. What kind of risk? Marcus asked. She hesitated, then said, to accept such a claim means to accept vulnerability, to open yourself to another. For a warrior, that is the greatest challenge of all. Marcus reached out, brushing a hand lightly over her forearm. I don't want you to be vulnerable alone. I want to stand with you, whatever comes. Her eyes softened, the blush deepening but no longer hiding behind stoicism. Then perhaps, she said, there is more for us than just battlefield. Alliance, Marcus grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. For the first time in her life, Commander Thryna, the woman who could face entire armies without fear, allowed herself to laugh. It was low and genuine, the sound of a fortress finally opening its gates. The stars outside the observation window glittered on, silent witnesses to the beginning of something new. In the days that followed, their relationship deepened quietly but unmistakably. The teasing words, the stolen glances, the shared moments of calm amidst chaos, each one built upon the last. Marcus learned the intricate rituals and unspoken codes of K-roll culture, while Thryna found strength not only in war but in connection.